Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Hope you are fine, hale, and hearty. Today, I am going to conduct my first class for MA in English or Master's student. So, I think you are doing whatever is necessary to keep you feet sound and safe. So, today, I am going to discuss about WBX as part of your modern poetry. So the course title is Modern Poetry. Course code is 311105. Actually, I am going to share few information about WBX or William Butler Yeats. Now, why have I selected William Butler Yeats? He is one of my favorite poets, modern poets. And his affiliation with solo Bengali or Indian Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore is very important, noteworthy, and significant to a great extent. Rabindranath Tagore was born in 1861. W. Yeats was born in 13 June 1865. Both the poets were interested in spirituality, music, and poetry. They depicted landscape and nature in their poetry, especially in images. Their poetry, especially Yeats's earlier poems and most of Tagore's poems were greatly influenced by Romanticism. Actually, Rabindranath Tagore, according to few critics, can be identified as a solo romantic in Bengali literature. On the other hand, W. Yeats is a modern poet, though was greatly influenced by Romanticism. There are many similarities in both poems, in both poets. Especially, they traveled to Metropole London, Imperial Metropole London, at the same time. They involved in cultural and political movement. On the other hand, their performances are poor as anti-colonial. I call them half-hearted anti-colonial nationalists. Another term that can be actually affiliated with their performance is wise imperialism. Anyway, I'm not going to discuss about post-colonial literature on the basis of Tagore and Yeats's performance. But to introduce Tagore's poetry in the literary circle of London, W.B. Yeats took great initiative. He gave an introduction to Gitanjali. Gitanjali was published in 1912, and both the poet won Nobel Prize. Rabindranath Tagore won Nobel Prize in 1920, 1913, and after one decade later, W. Yeats won Nobel Prize in 1923. And W. Yeats uh, was very much influential for Celtic twilight. Yeats emerged as a key figure of the Irish literary revival in the late 1800s. On the other hand, Tagore actually ignited Bengali Renaissance in the sense that he sought to establish the position and potential within the larger global connections, the position of Bengali poetry in the larger global connections, especially which was influenced by colonialism or in the greater circumference of colonial era. So after reading some of Tagore's self-translated poems, Yeats was instrumental in getting the collection published. So, which was very important and is also very important for the student of literature to know. Now, uh, we will go to W. Yeats. W. Yeats, the making of a poet. So the full name of W. Yeats is William Butler Yeats. For me, and for I think for the students of masters, Yeats's Anglo-Irish tradition, his childhood, his early thought of magic, music, and poetry are very important. You need to know, or you need to have all sorts of information to understand his poetic insight or to understand his poetry properly. As I said before, William Butler Yeats was born in a Dublin suburb on June 13, 1865, into a professional middle class family. Often it is said that Yeats was spiritually hyphenated. He belonged to the Anglo-Irish Protestant minority, descendants largely of English, Scots, and Huguenot stock. Settled in the country in the wake of Elizabeth's first and Cromwell's bloody conquest of Ireland in the 16th and 17th centuries. Born and bred in the country for 300 years, the Protestant minority felt itself Irish as much as British. So, Yeats, in W.B. Yeats, both the entity were there. So, Yeats's family had the characteristics of a colonial settler establishment, and they actually remained aloof from the Catholic, originally Gaelic speaking native population. On the other hand, the Catholic minority had lost most of its land to the Anglo-Irish aristocracy, known as the Ascendancy. So there is a rift. The Ascendancy drew its livelihood largely from rents from its estates and was based in the great country houses celebrated in his poems, such as ancestral houses. And the Ascendancy found his careers in the higher echelons of the military, colonial, and civil services. Lady Augusta Gregory, for example, Yeats's patron and friend, whose school park is evoked in several of his poems, was widow of the governor of Ceylon, and her son Robert died as a major in the British Air Force. At the same time, another very important information, particularly in the north, a class of small landowning Protestant farmers had prospered. So both these classes were sustained by the trading and professional strata from which Yeats's own family derived. So yes, the position of Yeats's family is very important to Yeats's development or growth as a poet or as a modern poet. It was important for Yeats to establish the Protestant strand in Irish nationalism, which is very important. It mattered, for example, his great grandfather, the Reverend John Yeats, rector of Drumkey in Sligo. As Yeats says in introductory rhymes, Robert Emate's friend, a 100-year-old memory to the floor. So, who was Robert Emmet? The Protestant Emmet was executed in 1803 for leading a rebellion against British rule. And his grandfather was himself imprisoned briefly under suspicion of supporting the rebellion. So the rebellion is in Yeats's blood. The Protestant tradition also in the 18th century supplied several of Yeats' literary heroes. The political theorist Edmund Burke, the satirist Jonathan Swift, poet and playwright Oliver Goldsmith, and the philosopher Bishop Berkeley are all celebrated in various forms. Now, come to W.B. Yeats' childhood, which is also important to know Yeats' growth as a poet. In 1867, Yeats's father abandoned a promising law career and enrolled in a London art school with the intention of being a painter. There, his religious belief drastically was changed. Charles Darwin and John Stuart Mill influenced him, and he exchanged Christian belief for skeptical views that compensated for religion, the importance of art. So Yeats's father gave importance on art than religion. Such radical breaks with convention eventually fostered W.B. Yeats' development as a poet. And there developed a rift between Yeats' father and mother, which actually dragged W.B. Yeats into an impoverished circumstance or circumstances, weakened his ties to his forefathers' faith. As a child who divided his time between London and visits to family back home, he grew sharply conscious of the conflicts that alienated colonial Ireland from imperial Britain, and that within Ireland divided Protestant descendants of British settlers from their usually less powerful and poorer Catholic neighbors. Yes, his mother Susan Mary came from a prosperous Protestant family called Polexpat, family of County Sligo, and his father came of a long line of Whale of merchants, government officials, landowners, and Church of Ireland clergymen. His mother didn't like his father's artistic bohemian life, so he disliked living in London and resented the financial hardship and loss of social position. She considered her position as unprofitable and vaguely disreputable career. So Yeats's mother never liked Yeats's father to be an artist. She considered her position as unprofitable and vaguely disreputable career. She gradually retreated into a speechless and bedridden state. So she was shocked, utterly shocked. She got bedridden. Actually, it was brought upon or on by depression, by a series of strokes that hastened her death in 1900 at the age of 58. It was a profound sense of loss to the believers. John Butler Yeats might have minimized his family's hardship. So his father might have minimized his family's hardship. Had he been able to sold his paintings, so his artistic talents virtually failed miserably. Income from house property and some modest farms sank drastically after 1863. In 1880, his property was earning next to nothing. By 1888, it had all been sold, the proceeds consumed by debt. Landing was encouraging poor by this time, and mostly Catholic tenant farmers all over Ireland to started protesting their lot by taking concerted against their usually Protestant landlords and sometimes engaged in violent intimidation. Though many landlords responded by evicting their tenants, the landlord eventually led to legislative concessions that limited rents and provided funds to assist tenants in purchasing the land they worked. The years were one on many Protestant landowning families whose status was diminished by this process. Such diminishment in the form of unpaid bills and somewhat shabby residences amplified their household tension. It indelibly marked the attitudes of the boy W.B. Yeats, who would later write such poems as Upon a House Shaken by the Land Agitation. So, step by step, we can see in every crisis or in the wake of drastical change, W.B. Yeats write poems to depict it or eliminate it. So there arises deprivations, and the deprivation was imposed by the land war, and his family's break with convention forced Yeats to live out part of his boyhood in dingy urban exile. So he was sent to Sligo, the Western Irish seaport home of the Polexpens. So after his father's departure for London, lack of money repeatedly obliged the family to take refuge with Susan C.S. parents. Yes' brother Jack, eventually one of the most distinguished Irish painters of 20th century, passed most of his life in Sligo. So they grew accustomed to studying in their grandparents' houses for months on, and especially during their earliest years and summers. The house, Marville, was an impressive one, a roomy mansion on 60 acres at the edge of town, where, in addition to their grandparents, the young Yeats mixed with a large complement of aunts, uncles, and servants. Although the Polexpens were seen as socially inferior to Sligo's landed gentry, their wealth was considerable. For the time being, their economic condition was secure, deriving from mid-sized manufacturing and shipping interests unaffected by the land war. Marville, the house, exposed the Yeats' children to solid material comforts and, more importantly, some of the most breathtaking countryside in Ireland. East of Sligo, the waters of Lough Gill lap the shores of many small islands, such as the one later immortalized as the Lake Isle of Innisfree. So, Lough Gill inspired Yeats to write the poem called The Lake Isle of Innisfree. In the north, waterfalls cascaded down the slopes of Ben Bulben, under which stood the fine church at Drumcliff, where Yeats's great-grandfather had been rector, and where the poet himself would be buried. To the west lay the cane-topped summit of Knocknarea, the fishing village of Roses Pond, and after that, the sea. So, the wide open environment, the free and frequent movement, gave young William Butler Yeats to think freely and to write some romantic poems. Both Yeats's earlier and later works make it clear that these places solaced him in deep and lasting ways and his source of music. And yet, his legal sojourns did not wholly allay his anxiety. For every restoring voyage, there was another painful return to London, and such oscillation made him wonder if he truly belonged in either place. In London, he was the shy, daydreaming son of a disconsolate mother and an apparently unsuccessful father. At his school, he was placed near the bottom of his class in most subjects and was derided by his classmates for being unathletic and Irish. In Sligo, he communed with soul restoring beauty, but couldn't escape some awareness of the fact that his Anglo Irish family connections to the beauty were less time honored than those of the Catholic servants and laborers they employed. And their ties went back for centuries, and their disadvantaged position reflected their ancestors' displacement by British settlers. A more immediate source of anxiety was the atmosphere at Marville. The Pollux fans were a moody, taciturn family. Yeats's grandfather was undoubtedly the chief William Pollux fan, a silent and fire-soul man, bold and had little patience for those more timid and reflective than he. Yeats's later poem and autobiographies celebrate his heroism, actually William Pollock's heroism. But to the sensitive child, he was a forbidding figure who presided over a strictly governed household filled with unspoken frustration. In 1881, John Butler Yeats returned his family to Ireland, where they stayed for 6 years before uprooting back to London. They spent first part of the of that 6 years at Howth, a scenic coastal village near Dublin. It was during that period the teenage Yeats began to formulate tentative responses to the conflicts that unsettled his country, his family, and his psyche. That he initially opted art school is testament to his father's early influence. But by 1886, he had abandoned painting and was gathering his nerve to make his own way as a writer, especially as a poet. Early religious and political views of W.B.Yeats and his nationalism. So these particular subject matter are very important to realize W.B. Yeats or William Butler's Yeats's poetry. Spiritual impulses stirred Yeats's into writing. People became detached from religion largely because of the stunning discovery of 19th century science about the Earth's age, the existence of now extinct species, human evolution, and so on. Those discoveries had made it difficult to accept the Bible and other traditional religious authority at face value. His father's skepticism was uncommon, but by no means unparalleled. Yeats found his father's forcefully expressed views difficult to ignore, but also possessed an unquenchable desire for some sort of spiritual wholeness which is capable of easing the world. So, Yeats's thought was never devoid of spirituality. Like Rabindranath Tagore, he sought for a soul spiritual power. His father's influences and the narrow conventionality he encountered both in Protestantism and Catholicism combined. He averted the mainstream religious institutions and their official orthodoxies. So Orthodox religion either Protestantism or Catholicism were unable to influence WBX's poetry. But he couldn't share his father's agnosticism, and by late adolescence, he had already rejected both conventional Christianity and scientific materialism. He kept listening to, he kept insisting on intuitive spiritual truths inaccessible to his father's house. So there is a clear difference between his father's thought and William Butler Yeats' thought. He embarked on a lifelong search for the secret, symbolically expressed wisdom. He believed the world's various orthodox and unorthodox religious traditions might have in common. At the high school and then during his art school, his friends liked the visionary poets and artists like George Russell. So George Russell was his friend. He was a nationalist, mystical poet or mystic who published under the pseudonym A.E., capital letter A. E. And it was from his inspiration or thought or from him that he derived his first encouragement to link his interest in the occult to a political as well as an artistic vision. So uh, the word occult, which is actually something very concealed, which we cannot see, which is mystic to some extent, which is vague, and their spirit or spiritual world linked with or were linked with that of Buddhism and the theosophy, which has become fashionable in the airy fairy circles in which the two move. Both the friend moves actually. The conjunction was to be crucial one in Yeats' development. So George Russell highly inspired W. Yeats to go to such airy fairy cycles. Soon he began to join an organized hermetical society, and when the fetish melange of Eastern and Western mystical lore known as theosophy swept Dublin's occult circles in 1885, he immersed himself eagerly. He found here a concert with magic and ritual, astral bodies, and occult ceremonies, which appealed to his anti-scientific bent. At the age of 20, he was a founder member of the Dublin Hermetic Society, a secret order devoted to the study of Oriental religions and the writings supposedly by the ancient Greco-Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus. 2 years later, in 1887, he joined the London Lodge of the Theosophists, a sect of spiritualists based on the revelations of the charismatic charlatan Madame Blavatsky, and he continued his study of Buddhist and Hindu traditions as filtered by her and her followers. Although he always preserved some of his father's skepticism, so no doubt his father's skepticism influenced him to some extent, and keep that type of skepticism in his mind. He also experimented with magic and attended seances, experiencing great shock on occasion when his spirit actually seemed to possess him for several moments. So that is very interesting. Actually, Yeats believed that he was captured by some sort of a spirit. These experiences eventually affected not only the substance of Yeats's work, but also, more fundamentally, what he perceived them to be. For him, there was a tantalizing similarity between the aesthetic wholeness created by a poem and the harmonizing supernatural of a magical spell. That is why he used symbols to evoke mysterious forces that promised to fit life's broken fragments into a deeper hidden unity. So, his uh, political views and nationalism next are followed by such stage of his life. The urge to connect his broken life to a greater unity soon enforced Yeats to write in sympathy with those whose visions of a united Ireland demanded reduced or severe ties to Britain. John O'Leary inspired the commitment. The bookish former revolutionary who became the young poet's political mentor in 1885. O'Leary urged him to foster coherent national culture by emulating Thomas Davies and other poets associated with the young Ireland, who had come to fame in 1880s by writing popular patriotic verses about Ireland in English language. So Yeats' taste was the militancy of the young Ireland movement, though he never joined uh, as a active militant, which under the pressure of the great famine of the 1840s rejected O'Connell's constitutionalism in favor of physical force and attempted an insurrection in 1884, a year of revolutions throughout Europe. Drawn largely from the urban professional classes, many of them Protestant, the young Irelanders left behind a residue of cultural nationalism, Song of History, which was to set an example for the young Yeats to follow and to write poems. O'Leary's influence was crucial for W.B. Yeats, but Yeats's father also modeled his politics. Unlike most members of Protestant families, and despite his losses during the Land War, John Butler Yeats didn't embrace unionism. That set of political and social convictions centering on the preservation of Ireland's political union with Great Britain. Such union also preserved the privileged status of the descendants of the colonists who had crossed the Irish Sea during the century. Old effort to merge Catholic Ireland with Protestant Britain's empire. He didn't, however, approve the aggressive tactics of the landing or of Charles Stuart Parnell, the leader of the Irish Party in the British Parliament. Parnell used his control over both the landing and the Irish Party to maneuver the British Parliament to the verge of granting Home Rule, which could give an Ireland its own partly autonomous legislature. So John Butler Yeats, William Butler Yeats's father, supported Home Rule but believed that pursuing it by threatening means violated the code of an Irish Protestant gentleman. Though his son would later experiment with more radical political ideas, he remained conditioned by his father's instinct about Home Rule and Irish Protestant gentility. Pierce's early poems typically offer chivalric allegories that meditates on the complexities of Irish politics and avoid direct calls for real-world insurrection. Yeats's politics were also conditioned by his meditations on the contrast between London's deprivation and Sligo's more attractive physical and cultural landscapes. By the late 1880s, his hatred for the city of his exile had less to do with mere poverty or the humiliation of being singled out as Irish than with the new understanding of London and more generally England because he had been deprived of England's own most radical artists and intellectuals. In addition to being the center of a global empire that included Ireland, England was also the cradle of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism, the home of factory-filled, slum-ridden, bustling, wealthy cities. Its association with the enslaving, soul-deadening consequences of empire, mass production, and laissez-faire social policies had long been described by a vibrant countercultural tradition stretching from such romantic poets as Blake and Shelley forward to the critic John Ruskin and to so-called pre-Raphaelite groups of artists. Their emphasis on the individual imagination and preference for pre-industrial moods of life and art had inspired John Butler Yeats' artistic inspiration. So John Butler Yeats' artistic inspiration is very important, as well as his political views are also influential to reshape Yeats's position or to transform his own thought about artistic and political feeling or movement. Steeping himself in this tradition, and in particular in the aesthetic and political doctrine of William Morris, Yeats associated England with everything he lauded about the modern world, with imperialism, with urban ugliness and squalor. So we clearly see Yeats's abhorrence towards England as an imperial leader. Ireland, by contrast, appeared unpolished, beautiful place where people lived according to age-old tradition, held on to magical time-honored beliefs. Ireland's remote western region had special importance because of West's comparative isolation from the British influence. Many of people spoke Irish, and many more preserved distinctively Irish stories and values. By his early 20s, Yeats was searching for the answer to his spiritual and political questions in the folk belief of Ireland's western country. People and in the heroic myths of the whole Ireland's Gaelic culture. These traditions, he felt, preserve satisfying ways of modernized place like England. Sorry, these traditions he felt, or he had felt, preserved satisfying ways of life and eternal spiritual truths that had been forgotten in modernized places like England. So we see the clear difference between Ireland and England. Ireland nurtured yet traditional and spiritual values that England failed to. And a modernized place like England actually encroached or tried to encroach in Irish culture that WBS never liked. From novels to political cartoons, Englishmen stereotyped the Irish as irrational, effeminate, and drunken. In other words, as unfit to govern themselves. So to England, to govern England was important. So they considered Irish mentality or Irish people as unfit to govern England. That's why they didn't give importance to Irish people. During his early years, he sought to counter such stereotypes by presenting Ireland and especially ancient and rural aspects. So Yeats tried to encounter such harsh criticism by England. So he actually depicted the rural aspect, which were full of beauty and passionate heroism. He thus also laid a foundation for building his own satisfying national identity. So ancient and rural aspect made a great impact for Yeats's own satisfying national identity. The Irish Republican Brotherhood was founded in 1858, which was also important, uh, that sought independence by physical force. As a young man, Yeats himself was a member of IRB. He despised that actually what he saw as the hypocritical religiosity of the Catholic lower middle classes who had turned against Parnell. By contrast, he celebrates the heroic solitude of men such as Parnell and Grattan, who seem to represent an alternative aristocratic tradition with which he could identify. So, here I would like to conclude. You need to know all those information about WBX. his childhood, his inclination towards magic, occult, his political and views on revolution. In many cases, you will find that John Butler Yeats, W.B.Yeats' father, influenced him to a great extent. But W.B. Yeats was able to separate his identity, though he never belonged to the Ireland nor belonged to England. He actually supported few things of England. Later on, when we will discuss about his political views thoroughly on the basis of his poetry, I would like to discuss about those things. So that is why he is called spiritually hyphenated. So during his lifetime, especially uh, in his early years, he struggled with his sense of belonging. So it was very difficult for him to fix his identity. If you don't read or if you don't go through his childhood, the environment that actually changed his position environmentally or uh, his existence regarding his belonging to several places, especially in Sligo or in London or in other countryside. So you need to read all those things. How and where he actually lived and how his family, his environment, actually the environment of those places motivated, influenced him spiritually and to some extent naturally. So next, in the next class, I am going to start with few of his points. You have to go to Norton Anthology and you have to exclude the points you have already read in the fourth year. Till then, stay safe and sound, be blessed and protected. Be aware or careful about your movement. Wherever you go, wear masks. Whatever you touch, wash your hands again and again. Don't go to the places which are cloudy. Don't mix with people who do not wear masks. If you do not keep yourselves safe, you will not be studying properly. So, safe or security first, then you have to study seriously. Someday the situation will change, and hopefully we will be able to overcome. Till then, thank you. Goodbye.